Let's talk about I mean, this seems like everyone in this room is, you've heard of this ChatGPT, and I know this is stuff that interests you, and you're probably the sort of guy who's been on top of this stuff for years, and it just kind of bubbles up for a lot of people like us. It seems like I haven't seen a technology that's kind of captivated the public, in a while.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little about these large language models. I mean, you just talked a little bit about how transformative AI is going to be in all these different industries. What about it from an investment standpoint? Because you and I were just chatting about this. I saw a headline, a company, I've never heard of them. Two guys leave Google, Chapter.ai, and they're looking to raise $250 million at a $1 billion valuation, maybe. What have we learned here? Because that seems like a big round for something that is probably a handful of engineers kind of banging away at a chat bot right now.
When I was at Facebook, my team and I were probably the first folks that really commercialized machine learning in the wild. When our first versions of Newsfeed and some other technologies that you guys probably interact with every day essentially was about using machines to guess, and to guess better and better over time. So that's basically what this is, just on steroids. And what ChatGPT shows you is just the amazing value in allowing computers to assist you in doing work. It's like a calculator replacing the abacus, replacing a pen and paper. What's important, though, is this Buffett quote. A friend of mine told me this yesterday, which I loved. He told this story about refrigeration, and the story he tells is that the people and the person that invented refrigeration made some money, but most of the money was made by Coca-Cola, who used refrigeration to build an empire. And I view these large language models as refrigeration. Will there be some money made in it? I think so. But the Coca-Cola has yet to be built. And those are the companies that are really going to monetize it. And in order to monetize it well, here's a basic thing about machine learning that's worth knowing, which is if you take 1,000 of the same inputs and give it to Facebook and Microsoft and Google and Amazon, they'll all come up with the same machine learning model. But if you have one extra thing, one little ingredient that all of those other companies don't have, your output can be markedly different. Mm-hmm. It's like giving two great chefs 3 ingredients, but you give the third chef one extra one. That person has the ability to do something very special. So right now, we are in the world where everybody is crawling the open web. We're going to move to a world where, as everybody gets sophisticated enough, where when refrigeration is widely available, somebody's going to say, you know what, this site, I'm not going to allow anybody else to access. It's only me, only for my models. And those models will become better. And so we have to let that play out a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so it's going to be a little bit of a really interesting arms race. So the next wave of M&A, for example, could be companies like Google and Microsoft and Facebook looking at these companies saying, can they be viable inputs to my large language models or to my other machine learning and AI models? So you could see M&A activity that drives that differentiation before anything else. So so then as a result, for guys like us, early stage investors, we may want to invest in companies that have zero viable public market potential whatsoever, but is building a data repository that's so unique that we know that it will feed one of these bigger companies and their efforts in AI. And that could very well justify making an investment that we would otherwise not make today, knowing what we know.
And on that front, I mean, so regulatory really quickly, because we only have a couple minutes here. I mean, 10 years ago, Facebook would just buy the next thing, right? They'd pay $1 billion. The fact that Microsoft paid $1 billion investment in OpenAI, in a different regulatory environment, they might have just bought it. They couldn't buy OpenAI. But does this also excite you about early stage tech investing in this environment? Does the regulatory environment actually help your cause to let some of these companies bubble up a bit further than they might if they were just kind of taken over by the incumbents?
Yeah, I mean, I think the incumbents are going to have to veer into adjacent M&A that it's non-obvious, mm-hmm. that will pass regulatory muster. And then separately, it'll allow people who build the Coca-Colas of the world, who use refrigeration properly, to actually emerge with a lot less threat, where the cross-bundling and the cross-selling and upselling that the big tech companies use to basically eliminate a lot of competition will be very difficult. I mean, classic example, look at the emergence of Reels and what Reels has done, and maybe it's not as obvious to everybody here, to the enterprise value of TikTok. I mean, I think we've all thought that ByteDance was going to be a $200 or $300 billion company. There's all this, value tied up in it. All these folks have these big stakes in it. But if you look at the growth of Reels, it's probably halved the enterprise value of TikTok before the regulatory stuff has happened. So that kind of stuff, I think, allows, when all the big folks are fighting amongst each other, it allows the little folks to kind of, hit the seam and actually build something amazing.
All right, before we get out of here, a lot of you guys are probably all-in podcast fans. You know that he has, the tendency for a little hot take. Give me something, man. I'm going on Fast Money in an hour here. What do you got? What's a hot take to leave this audience with?
Wow, what's a hot take? Well, my most interesting thing right now is I have looked at, and Mike Wilson inspired me to do this. I basically went back and I looked at Google's P&L. And just for, shits and giggles, I took all the TAC, the traffic acquisition costs that they pay, and I put it back into COGS and I capitalized it. And I'm like, what's the true PE if you did that? And then I did the same thing for Facebook. Because, you hear this constant thing, which is like, oh, this thing trades at 20 times, it's so cheap. Oh, Facebook trades at, 8 times, it's so cheap. And it turns out Facebook trades at 19 times and Google would trade at 31 times. And then all of a sudden it's not so cheap. So there's a hot take.
There you go.
Which is when you look at software businesses and you actually capitalize some of these costs and look at true EBITDA, they're not nearly as interesting on a implied yield basis as others.
You sound like a good friend of mine, Jim Chanos. This sort of economic, I was going to say Cold War with China, but it seems pretty hot. How does that affect some of the ways you think about these transformative technologies? Because again, our government is banning advanced, technology sales to China. It just seems like we're going to be in this bipolar tech world.
It's great for America.
Does it? Okay, I want to hear.
Unbelievable. It's an unbelievable boon for America. And it's an unbelievable boon for America's technology sector. The thing is, when you look inside of China, they are extremely good at process engineering. They're also extremely good at additive manufacturing. They're extremely great in things like specialty chemicals. But all of those things, when you think about the precursors, come from American, European, Australian companies that now have a huge incentive to diversify that supply chain away from China. That benefits American companies in a massive way. And so China's response is muted. So for example, we said we are going to slow down the flow of extremely advanced semiconductor manufacturing equipment into China. China's response said we are not going to allow you guys to get the input components to certain silicon wafers that are used in PV cells. I mean, if you had to rank these things, no offense, but we can make solar cells. The equipment that you need to get to 2 nanometer scale in chip design comes from the Dutch, the Germans, and the Americans. And so it's a really interesting moment where this, the game theory optimal view is that China's cost advantages actually get moved over, right? So the margin decay in China gets replaced by margin expansion in these businesses here that now allow them to operate in parity. So I think it's a really, really unique moment